welcome back to Psychedelics Today, a weekly podcast exploring the science and culture of the emerging psychedelic field with your hosts Kyle Buller and Joe Moore. Today on the show, I am joined by Jessica DiRuzza from Trust Psyche, Archetypal Astrology and Depth Psychology. So Jessica received her master's in counseling psychology with an emphasis in depth psychology from Pacifica Graduate Institute, and also completed an undergrad at CIIS, the California Institute of Integral Studies, where she taught archetypal astrology and transpersonal psychology. So in this episode, Jessica and I explore the intersections of astrology and psychedelics, how astrology could be used as an integrative framework and for helping to understand maybe what's going on in psychedelic experiences. Also, kind of like our previous episode with Ren Butler, also using astrology as a tool for maybe understanding what psychedelic experiences could be like depending on transits. And just want to preface, I know astrology might feel kind of out there on the fringes to some folks, and I get that. I totally understand. I was very skeptical. Studying transpersonal psychology, you definitely get exposed to a lot of interesting ideas and frameworks. And I've always approached a lot of stuff with some sort of healthy skepticism. Even with breathwork, when I went down to breathwork, I was very skeptical of what was going on there. And just having different experiences throughout life and just trying to be curious, just really having certain experiences and then things unfolding, be like, maybe there's something here. And that kind of happened with me with astrology. Very skeptical of it. And then, just had some interesting experiences throughout my life that just kind of opened me up a little bit more to explore it. And I like Jessica's approach to astrology coming from this like archetypal approach. And, the way that I see it is it's a nice framework for understanding these archetypal themes that come up in our lives and also that come up in psychedelic experiences. And so that's the way I've always approached it is, these archetypes that become present, and then, what's the narrative around some of these archetypes and how could I use that as a way to maybe explore the experience, explore like what it means, maybe how to navigate it a little bit differently. And something, one framework that, Joe and I teach is the Grof framework, right? And so one of the big things with the Grofian framework is the perinatal birth matrices, right? And that's a framework. Doesn't mean that your birth experiences are always influencing what's going on here. And, you don't need to relive your birth experience in psychedelic or breathwork experiences. But, it's a helpful tool to maybe understand, and it could just help to, add a little bit of language to create new narratives, I guess. So, that's the way I guess I approach any sort of framework is that, they're just frameworks, right? You can use them as a tool. And how can you integrate that into your life, when things are going tough? Like maybe astrology is a wonderful tool and framework to help you understand what the hell is going on. And so, yeah, I just really encourage everybody to kind of approach this with an open mind. If you're feeling skeptical. And hey, that's totally okay. Like I said, I'm pretty skeptical about a lot of things and just really appreciate Jessica for coming on, sharing her work. I just found it really interesting. Some of the things she was saying, she goes a bit through my chart. And so, you'll hear some examples of, things lining up or the way things have unfolded, and also just how I've navigated, some of my experiences with astrology as well. And, it's also interesting with Jessica coming from the CIIS background and working with folks like Stan Grof and Rick Tarnes. And, I find that really interesting too. Stan maybe being somewhat skeptical of astrology and then stumbling across Rick Tarnes and, them teaching classes together about it. So again, I hope you enjoy this episode. And I really enjoyed chatting with Jessica, very lovely soul, and she's doing some wonderful work here. And I just like her approach to navigating astrology and psychedelics. So if you want to learn more about Jessica, you can check out her website, trustpsyche.com. You can learn more about her offerings. I think she's also has a podcast, some videos up on there exploring astrology. So if you're interested in exploring astrology, definitely check that out, trustpsyche.com. She also has some courses coming up on astrology. So if you want to learn more and maybe learn how to integrate astrology into your practice, or maybe just understand some of the astrological terms, so maybe you could start to incorporate that into an integration framework, might be a really great opportunity for you. So again, you can check out our website, trustpsyche.com, and I hope you enjoy this episode with Jessica DiRuzza. And a little bit of business before we get started here. I just want to let everybody know that Joe and I have our Navigating Psychedelics for Clinicians and Therapists course coming up. That starts on Thursday, May 7th, and we're going to have those two groups again, starting at 2 p.m. Eastern Time, and then 7 p.m. UK time, and then also 7 p.m. Eastern Time, 4 p.m. Pacific time. So if you want to learn more, if you're a clinician, coach, therapist, somebody who wants to learn more about psychedelic integration, navigating the little nuances of the psychedelic experience, learning about, the new developments that are happening, be able to have conversations with others, have conversations with Joe and I. You can learn more at psychedeliceducationcenter.com. Again, this is a hybrid course, so you'll get access to recorded videos, interviews, and then you'll join Joe and I and other guests on some live calls to do question and answer, to have live discussion about the topics that are coming up through the week, so we can really kind of pull apart these topics and go deeper. We try to keep the classes at a small classroom size for the online component, so it's also a nice intimate learning environment too. So again, if you're interested in joining us and you want to deepen your psychedelic education, join us at psychedeliceducationcenter.com and check out the Navigating Psychedelics for Clinicians and Therapists course. If you like what we're doing here at Psychedelics Today, you can support us by subscribing on iTunes, Stitcher, Spotify, Google Podcasts, wherever. Share some content. So, share posts on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, wherever you like to hang out in the social media world. That helps us tremendously, just to help us get the work out there. And if you're feeling called to donate monthly, you can check out patreon.com/psychedelics today. And also, this episode is brought to you by Audible. You can get a free audiobook, not ebook, by signing up for a 30-day trial membership at audible.com/psychedelics today, and check that out. Or you could go to psychedelicstoday.com/welcome and click the link on Audible there. Wonderful service. I love it. I've been digging through audiobooks recently. Got some titles from William James, and then also James Hillman. There's a lot of psychedelic things up there as well. So if you're a podcast enthusiast and want to dig into some books, this is a great way to do so. So audibletrial.com/psychedelics today. And then also soltara.co. If you're interested in exploring ayahuasca plant medicine retreat in a safe setting in Costa Rica, definitely encourage you to check out soltara.co. Had a wonderful time down there and felt very safe, really enjoyed the environment. And if you want to learn more about my experience there, you can go back to a previous episode with Hallie Rose from the Thought Room, debriefing my experience there. And then we will also be releasing an episode with Melissa and Dan from Soltara soon as well. And if this path calls to you and you want to go to a retreat, you can get $200 off on your next retreat by typing in the code psychedelics today at checkout. So that's it for now, folks. I hope you enjoyed this episode with Jessica DiRuzza, and we'll catch you on the other side. All right, welcome back, everybody, to Psychedelics Today. Today we are joined with Jessica DiRuzza. Welcome to the show. I'm really excited to chat with you about astrology and psychedelics. Kind of a topic that might be a little, I guess, quote unquote, woo-woo for some of the psychedelic and scientific community, but I find it to be fascinating and I'm excited to explore this topic with you. So welcome to the show, Jessica.
Thank you so much, Kyle. Hello, everyone. It's such an honor to be here today. I'm excited for our journey together.
Yeah. So let's give the listeners a little background about who you are and some of your work.
Okay, so I'm a licensed psychotherapist. I graduated from Pacifica Graduate Institute in Santa Barbara, California, with a master's in counseling psychology and an emphasis in depth psychology. And I currently run a full-time private practice. But what I also do is I teach and practice astrology. I've been practicing astrology over a decade, since 2007. And I incorporate it into my psychotherapy practice. And I also teach my students how to do what I do in their counseling work. So I work with a lot of psychotherapists. I actually work with a lot of people who work with medicine, and using astrology as a tool and a language to help both make meaning of our lives, but also to integrate what's happening in visionary states.
Awesome. Thank you. And you've also spent some time at CIIS, that's correct?
Yes, I did my bachelor's there, and I studied and taught with Stan Grof and Richard Tarnes in the philosophy, cosmology, and consciousness program.
Yeah, so you have a nice transpersonal kind of foundation there in
Yes,
the Grof lineage and Tarnas lineage.
that's what started me off was transpersonal psychology, archetypal astrology, and then I moved into depth psychology. And so for me, they've kind of been the my own personal holy trinity of integrating psychology, psychedelics, and astrology.
That's awesome. Yeah, and I don't mean to offend you by saying astrology is woo-woo. I rely on astrology. I find it to be really fascinating. And I think we only had one other person on the show to talk about this topic, and that was Ren Butler.
Yes, I know, Ren.
Yeah. And, I think it was really interesting. Like our teacher, Lenny Gibson, he's not like, I guess not too much of a fan of astrology at times, right? But he said his views of it started to shift a little bit once Stan started becoming interested in astrology, right? Medical doctor, I mean, obviously one of the main theorists of transpersonal psychology, but when he really linked up with Tarnas, he started to see some interesting correlations there between transits and psychedelic experiences. And so there is this cool kind of foundation there from the Grof lineage, with Grof teaching these classes with Tarnas, incorporating astrology for understanding the psychedelic experience. So I think it is a valid tool for either preparation and integrating the experience.
Well, what is interesting, and I'm not sure how much people who follow Graph are aware of this, but ever since the 1970s, about 1974, Stan was following his transits and looking at the chart and transits of all of the clients that he was working with. My teacher, Richard Tarnes, was a student of Stan's, and Stan was actually his advisor for his dissertation on LSD psychotherapy. And at Esalen, when Rick Tarnas went to study with Stan, they discovered astrology as a diagnostic tool for
Mm.
understanding what kind of experience someone would have when they would do psychedelics. And so, since the mid 70s, Stan has actually been using astrology for his work. And it not only informs the clinical work he does, but it also deeply informs his worldview, his cosmology, and understanding of the nature of reality.
It's amazing. And I like that idea of a diagnostic tool. Could you talk a little bit more about that?
So, what originally was happening was they discovered something called transit astrology, where you look at where the position of the planets are in the sky right now relative to where they were when you were born. Those are called your personal transits. So, at the moment of your birth, planets are all in a relationship to one another, and they make geometrical or angular relationships, and that stays fixed for your entire life. And that tells you about everything from your personality to your psychology to the type of relationships you have and so forth. But then what's interesting is the planets keep moving after you're born, and those relationships show you the unfolding of your psyche or your life through time. And what Stan and Rick realized is that by looking at this, you could start to get a sense of the types of experiences archetypally or thematically that people would have when they were doing psychedelics. What I find interesting is that you can absolutely use astrology to help you understand the timing of entheogens, but you can also use it to help you make meaning, to process, to metabolize or digest what's happening in these visionary states and essentially ground or bring back what's happening in the transpersonal realm into your everyday life.
Awesome. Thank you. And for those that, might be a little skeptical of astrology, and I think sometimes people just read the newspaper horoscopes and think maybe that's just what astrology is, and there's no way that one sign is going to tell me who I am. I don't know. How do you approach this work? And like, what would you say to people that might have some healthy skepticism about astrology being a tool?
Fair enough, right? Like, I can't stand most astrology that I see. It's just ridiculous. It's like, yeah, a musician hearing somebody play something that is very basic, one note, and thinking that they're playing an entire song.
Right.
That's not what's happening. Like, who believes that 1/12 of the population is going to be having the same experience? Anybody who's thinking critically is going to see through that immediately. So, I've always appreciated what Rick says at the beginning of his book, Cosmos and Psyche. Skepticism is the chastity of the intellect. It's
Mm,
what keeps it pure. But if you take it too far, you live a barren life. No
right.
meaning can come in. So, how can we be skeptical and rigorous and yet open and listening at the same time? So, the form of astrology that I practice, archetypal astrology, doesn't just look at the signs or the houses, like you're a Leo or you're a Taurus, but it looks at all of the planets together in a symphony and understanding what it is that their relationships indicate about our lives. So, the best way to see if you want to even entertain that possibility whatsoever is to get a really good reading from a really good astrologer and see, does it resonate? Does it help you? Does it make sense? Is it relevant to your life? Because a really good reading should make you feel the most seen you've ever been seen in your
Mm,
entire life. That's the
yeah.
level of power that it has.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think my first astrology reading, I definitely felt that. And it definitely prepped me for a bunch of events that unfolded. And I kind of went into it feeling pretty skeptical. And I was like, I don't know. Like, it's interesting to have like a transpersonal background, but like approaching a lot of this stuff with some sort of healthy skepticism. And I think that helps me bring a little bit of curiosity, be like, well, I don't know if I believe in this, right? Let's test it and see if it does work. And I've found it to be like a really great integrative tool, especially when exploring these like holotropic states of consciousness for just some sort of grounding, like an anchor for to develop some sort of meaning about what is going on here. How are things unfolding? And I guess sometimes the way I've always seen it, it's like the birth chart, like you're kind of in the center and all these planets are like playing musical chairs and all these personalities are starting to bump up against each other, and that's just resonating because you're in the center there. And how is that like influencing you in this moment in time?
Yeah, our solar system is an extension of our ecosystem here on Earth. And within our solar system, these planets, these cosmic bodies, they are since the beginning of time how we've both kept track of time and how we've made meaning or the story of what it is to be human. So, for millennia, the one thing that human beings have agreed upon across culture and across era are the meaning of the planets. There's
Mm,
absolutely no controversy whatsoever about the meaning of Venus as the relationship, as the planet of beauty, love, and relationship. And that's incredible that people across this entire globe for thousands and thousands of years have all agreed upon that.
hmm,
So there's something to it. And, it is our first science.
right.
Astrology is the original science. And we can actually see through the evolution of consciousness that what drove us in many regards scientifically and mathematically was trying to make sense of the movement of the planets, because planet means wanderer in Greek. And we would look up every night at the sky and would say, why are all the rest of the stars fixed and these bodies keep moving? And that's
Mm.
actually what drove us in the Western world mathematically and scientifically.
Yeah. I mean, thinking about the thousands of years people have just been staring at the sky, right? Before light pollution has come in to the scene, and maybe we don't look up as much. And so maybe it does seem like this kind of wonky thing because we're not paying attention to the stars as much as we used to, right?
We know that there's just such deep connections there. For example, with the lunar cycle, women's menstruation is connected to the cycle of the moon. The word month comes from the word moon. The seven
Hmm.
days of the week are each named after seven planets. So astrology and astronomy are deeply woven into how we keep track of time. And we know that keeping track of time quantitatively is one thing, but it's also how we keep track of time qualitatively. And
Mm.
what is the quality of the time that we're living in? As epochs come and go, as decades come and go, as periods in your life come and go, they each have a distinct quality to them. And astrology helps us keep track of that quality. But really, what it does is it connects all the moments in our lives, both personally and collectively, into a meaningful story.
Right. Yeah, and that's really interesting to see kind of events unfold over time and see kind of like that archetypal theme that might be attached to it, or just these repeating narratives that happen over time. Because right now we're kind of in a transit that's similar to what was going on in the 60s. Was it a
Okay.
Pluto Uranus transit of some sort?
That's right. Yes.
Yeah.
From 1960 to 72, the planets Pluto and Uranus, two outer planets further from the sun, were in a conjunction, meaning the same place in the sky. And so Uranus is about radical revolution, change, freedom, emancipation, new beginnings, technology, science. And Pluto is the archetype of power and transformation and evolution. It also relates to the unconscious, the id, right? It's more of that wild primal part of existence. And when you get the two together, you get things like radical revolutions that sweep the world: civil rights, women's rights, gay rights, trans rights. And so all of this was flourishing in the 60s. You can also see it in music and rock and roll and what
Yeah.
happened at Woodstock. And now, since 2007, we're in the last year, 2020. It's the first time since the 60s Uranus and Pluto have come together in a major alignment. Now they're in a square.
Well, it's interesting too within the past decade how much like psychedelic research has kicked off and just like all the social movements that are happening. I mean, obviously it's a different flavor than what happened during the 60s, but kind of similar too, it feels like, right? Like, I think we're going to look back at this time and be like, wow, like we were definitely living through some really interesting times. And maybe, the kids that are growing up in years ahead and be like, man, I wish I grew up during like the 20 teens, that was a wild time. The internet
Well,
came in and psychedelics were bubbling up and
Well, like something's happened to the Matrix when, I was at a dinner last week, with what do you want to call them, muggles or people in the mainstream. And they suggested to me that maybe they could do MDMA assisted psychotherapy for PTSD that they had gone through. And I just looked at them and I was like, what? Where did you hear this? And they're like, oh, I read about it in the New York Times. Oh, I saw it on the TV. And it's like psychedelics have now become part of the mainstream dialogue. I remember at the beginning of this past decade, very few people even knew what the word patriarchy meant. Very
right.
few people knew that we were in the sixth mass extinction and killing over 20,000 species a year. And now it's part of the common tongue and it's on the nightly news. So psychedelics and the reemergence of them, along with understanding the ecological crisis that we're in. Now, these aren't accidents that these things are all coming into the collective consciousness at the same time. And yes, it just so happens to be that these planets of Uranus and Pluto correspond or correlate with those types of themes emerging in the collective psyche.
Hmm. Something that comes up, I guess, in astrology is Pluto and Uranus creating this, or is it
Mm.
just like, it has an influence, right? So I guess it's kind of like that predictive type of approach, and this is causative versus, there's maybe it's subtly influencing, or this isn't the reason why these things are happening, but it's how these things might be manifesting. Could you speak maybe a little bit more to that?
Sure. I mean, this is one of the deepest kind of philosophical questions of astrology is causation. And this is definitely coming out of the modern paradigm that sees things as more of a machine. It's more of a mechanistic, materialistic worldview, especially over the past 500 years. So all of our education, our science and our math comes out of a causal paradigm. And so naturally, we're going to look at astrology through that lens and say, so are the planets creating these forces that are making our lives be a certain way? Do we have free will, or is it all determinism and fate? And the way that I understand it physically is that the planets aren't emitting some kind of force or gravitational force or anything like that that's causing us to be a certain way. They are just indicative. They're just reflective in a sense of deep, deep interconnectivity that what is happening in the sky corresponds or correlates to what's happening here. And, actually, I like this analogy that Rick Tarnes gives. When the clock, and you look at the clock and it says that it's 1:30 p.m., the clock isn't causing it to be 1:30 p.m.
Right.
The clock is just indicating that time. You could use a similar analogy with astrology. But more deeply, I think really what's at hand is people want to know whether or not they have free will or any sense of agency in their life. Or are we just destined, fated to live a certain way? Because if you live in a causal paradigm and the planets are causing us to be a certain way, then naturally the mind thinks, well, then I'm fated to this life.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't see it that way. I see fate and free will coexisting. It's a mixture of both. Just as we're born into a family with a certain set of characters already in play, our father's a certain way, our mother's a certain way, our siblings are a certain way. We can't control that, right?
Right.
That's handed to us. But once we wake up within the family system, we do have a certain sense of choice. We can participate and make decisions to change certain timelines or lineages that we're part of. We can change the story. We might not be able to change the entire story,
Right.
but at least we can take responsibility for our part in the story and make choices there. So it's always a mixture of both.
Right. And then I even think about like this concept of genetics or epigenetics in a sense of like, like I'm destined to be this certain way because this was passed down, or I grew up in this certain environment and I can never change. When thinking about like astrology, it's like, oh, I was born into this chart and this is going to be my destiny. Like sometimes I feel like we can change that, right? If we put enough focus on changing that and really kind of stepping into that and be like, well, yeah, it might be kind of like, this is like where I'm at, but I think we also have that free will to make change.
Absolutely. I mean, if you take a lens of social justice here, if you're born in America, you're born into a culture that is built upon systemic racism and the oppression of people of color and the oppression of women. Like we're born into that, or our entire culture is pervaded by that, whether we like it or not. But by the very act of becoming conscious of that and educating ourselves about our history, we start to have a choice to change the system. And the same is true in astrology. Like you're a Leo, right? The sun was in the sign of Leo when you were born. And Leo is very fiery. But one thing that Leo likes is to be the center of attention. And there's a strong quality for a very charming personality, hence you running this show. Right?
I'm a very quiet Leo, though, sometimes.
And so the reason why you're quiet, Leo, is because the planet Venus was right next to the sun when you were born. And Venus is a more feminine planet, and its energy is to be more yin or receptive. And so Sun Venus people like yourself prefer to have a social grace, to be collaborative, very oriented towards the other and relationship, partnership. Right? It's much more dialogical than maybe you would think as a classic Leo.
Right.
So we have to look to the other planets in your chart to say, oh, but Venus is there too. But you're never going to stop being a Leo, no matter how hard you try. But that's not the point, right?
Yeah.
So, but I think psychedelics do something similar to us. I mean, how many people have done psychedelics and come to the realization in some way or another that you can change your DNA or you can change your epigenetics? It's a common theme that many people wake up to when they do psychedelics.
Yeah.
So for me, that's just a metaphor that is maybe grounded in the physiological world, but so too is astrology then. It's also a metaphor. They're
Yeah.
just different ways to describe reality.
Right. Yeah. Another tool, another cosmology. And sometimes it's helpful for some and others, maybe it doesn't resonate.
Absolutely. And the
Yeah.
same would be true with psychedelics. I don't
Yeah.
believe it's meant for everybody, but for the people it is, it becomes oftentimes a very deeply spiritual path that
Yeah.
helps you and live more fully, hopefully, and more
Hmm.
wholeheartedly in your life. And
Yeah.
I would hope that astrology would do the same for those who practice it.
Yeah. To come back a little bit, you mentioned that analogy of the clock. And, I had this interesting experience where a friend of mine pulled up the birth chart and pressed play on whatever, software he was using. And I'm just watching the planets just like go around in the circle. And I was just looking at it, I was like, this is like a cosmic clock. And I thought the same thing, like when these planets line up, like, does this equal noon, right? And around noontime, we know that we typically eat lunch, right? Doesn't mean that we're gonna eat lunch, but it's when the planets line up that way, maybe we know. Or we hit these certain periods, we go, oh, Saturn's back here. This is usually a time of like deep transition. And so that is a really interesting analogy. When I was watching this birth chart just play out for like 60 or 70 years of my life, I was like, whoa, this is kind of cool to just watch, looking at this cosmic clock and how are these transits going to impact me, or, where's my life going to be looking at this thing. So it was actually kind of a weird, trippy experience I had looking at that.
Yes, I love the cosmic clock. And
Yeah.
it's sacred geometry. It really is. I mean, you're looking at sacred geometry. When you look at your birth chart, you're looking at the sacred geometry of the moment that you took your first breath. And
Hmm.
so, in that way, it's yours. And it's like, that's who you are. You're born of this moment in time, and you carry this quality of this moment through this sacred geometry of this cosmic clock.
Yeah. How did you get interested in astrology? Was it at your time at CIS? Did you have any interest beforehand? And then CIS really kind of helped you like really dive deeper into it? Or yeah, what's your story behind astrology?
Well, this is my love of psychedelics. It's actually psychedelics that brought me to astrology.
Interesting.
In 2007, I was 20 years old and I went to my first Burning Man. And at Burning Man in my camp, someone there was giving astrology readings. And so, at some point during the day, I sat down and they gave me a reading. And it was very brief, about 10 minutes. And it just completely broke me open. And it felt like I'd been waiting my entire life for this moment.
Mm,
And what ended up happening was I was living in Boulder, Colorado at the time, and I went out to San Francisco after Burning Man to visit this person who had read my chart because I wanted to know more. And I ended up doing a high dose LSD session, and in that session, I relived my birth, gave birth to myself, left space time, and in being outside of space time, the astrology was downloaded into me, and the archetypal realm, the ability to see archetypally and read the world archetypally was given to me. And then when I came back in from that experience, it turned out that the person whom I was with during this session was teaching with Stan Grof and Rick
mm,
Tarnes at CIIS. And so they gave me the book LSD Psychotherapy. I read it and I ended up selling all my belongings, dropping out of college, and moving out to San Francisco to go to CIS and understand the connection between psychedelics, astrology, and healing.
mm. Awesome. Thanks for sharing that.
Yeah.
I'm curious, to talk about psychedelics and astrology and how astrology could be compatible with preparation and integration. Do you have a story of yours that you could share with the listeners about like maybe a psychedelic experience that you had where the transits lined up or kind of influence your psychedelic experience? So yeah, kind of diving into that diagnostic tool and how it could maybe influence your psychedelic experience and the similarities there.
Sure. Yeah, I see a lot of parallels between astrology and psychedelics. We could take that experience that I was just talking about in 2007. At that time, I had a transit that only happens once in your entire life. And that was the planet Uranus was conjunct my ascendant or my rising sign. So that's the place of the eastern horizon at the moment of your birth. And Uranus brings new beginnings, radical change and breakthrough, rebirth, awakening, and revelation. And it does so suddenly and filled with surprise. And so here I was doing psychedelics, discovering astrology, and radically changing my entire life. I was going to school for sociology. I was married at the time. And through these experiences, I uprooted my entire life and pursued what could be more Uranian than psychedelics and astrology.
Right.
And it completely redefined who I was, because the rising or the ascendant has to do with your persona, has to do with who you are from moment to moment as you move through the world. But it was also square my Jupiter. And Jupiter magnifies whatever it touches and also brings in a philosophical orientation. And so here I was classically with Uranus Jupiter transit, having one of the peak experiences of my entire life that I will, in a sense, be spending the rest of my life trying to integrate what happened there. And my whole body of work as a psychotherapist and astrologer comes from that specific moment. And so it's a birth moment, and it really represents a whole new era of my life starting. And that's what you see when you go through a Uranus conjunct the ascendant transit, especially square Jupiter. And so when you see that and you read about what that means and you go, that's exactly what just happened to me. I mean, geez, if you're paying attention, you'd hope you'd look into that a little bit more.
Right. For those that might not really understand some astrology lingo, could we go over just briefly sun, moon, rising, and then square conjuncting and the transit stuff?
Sure. So, for example, your sun is in Leo, as I said earlier. So the sun represents your sense of self. It's your identity in the world. It's how you shine forth in your own unique, creative, and autonomous way. And it also represents more of your egoic consciousness. And so whatever sign the sun is in, that sign stylizes the sun. But more importantly, we want to look at the other planets that are in relationship to the sun to understand your sense of self, but also your individuation process and like what your mission is. Whereas the moon represents more of our relational matrix. The moon is the relationship we have with our mother, with our father, and our family. It represents our early childhood experiences. It also represents our emotions and our feelings, how we feel about ourselves, how we feel about others, and also that deep sense of belonging that we either have or don't have. And then the rising is the position on the eastern horizon at the moment of your birth. And that represents more of who you are moment to moment. It's like the initial energy you present to the world. So that's why you can think of it as your persona or your mask. But it's not just a mask. It's just how you initially meet existence. So for you, you have Mars there. So there's this kind of bursting forward energy that you have. You carry a lot of courage. You carry a lot of strength. You are a warrior. You carry a strong will and an ambition and drive, which you have to do to be doing the things that you're doing. There's a sense of both confidence, but also a sense of moving towards something and in a way wanting to conquer. And I don't mean that in a negative sense. I mean in that sense of like, there's an ambition that you carry to discover. You have an adventuresome spirit. Whereas your moon in Taurus at the midheaven represents the part of you that actually really loves pleasure and comfort. You're a very sensual being. Good food, good drinks, good music. You need these things in order to feel safe, to feel connected, to be nurtured. But it's at your midheaven. So you actually are very oriented towards bringing a sense of connection, love, and beauty to other people. And that it's really important for you to create tribe everywhere you go that really carries these Taurian qualities. I imagine that's what you are doing with psychedelics today.
Trying to.
Yeah, I think you're doing it.
Yeah, thank you.
And then, then the aspects, the conjunction, opposition, square, trine, and sextile are the 5 major aspects. It's just the division of the zodiac. Zodiac means belt of life. It's a 360-degree circle. And when you divide that circle up, you get the aspects. And so each aspect carries a different quality. The conjunction is the new moon, when the sun and the moon are in the same position in the sky. That represents a new beginning. Whereas the full moon, the circle cut in half, is 180 degrees. And that represents when the sun is opposite the moon. It's a time period of blossoming, coming to fruition. It brings a sense of fullness to it. So they're just there's cycles of time and the cosmic clock, and it's just the aspects for us to understand where we're at in the cycle of time that's happening.
Mm. Awesome. Thanks for that. I've been studying this stuff for a bit, and still I even need some reminders about,
Yeah.
because it's interesting how everybody approaches it. It sounds like, there's a lot of different schools of thought in astrology. Like, I know from your background, like the archetypal, like you guys don't even really dig into the houses, right? Versus like some others do, or maybe you do, but you don't pay too much attention to it.
Yeah, there's just like there's however many languages spoken on this planet. Astrology is a language. It means the language of the stars. That's what astrology means. And so there's thousands, if not millions, of ways to speak this language. So there's different schools of thought, just like there's different ways to speak.
Yeah.
And in archetypal astrology, yes, the tendency is to not focus as much as the signs in the houses, but that's not really what defines it. What defines
Right.
it is the worldview or cosmology that goes behind the interpretation.
Hmm.
So archetypal astrology is archetypally predictive, not concretely predictive. So we're not going to sit here and tell you you're going to get married at this age, or you're going to get divorced at this age, or you're going to die at this age. We don't do those types of concrete, literal predictions. But what we can do is look at the archetypal themes of your life and say, yeah, during this time period, there's going to be a focus on work. During this time period, there's going to be a focus on family. During this time period is an opportunity to take risks, and so on. So it's a participatory cosmology where you're always one end of the relationship. And by engaging or participating, you co-create your reality along with all the other beings around you. So yes, it's true. Not as much focus on signs and houses,
Yeah.
though you can be archetypal about that as long as you're
Right.
doing it in a way that's not predictive.
Cool. Awesome. You made a comment a little bit earlier before we started recording. You said astrology can provide a worldview or a cosmology for the psychedelic experience. You want to, give a little background about what you believe with that?
Sure. I mentioned earlier that I feel like there's a lot of parallel for me with astrology and psychedelics. For me, they both bring us back to our own divinity,
Mm.
and the divine within the world around us or the cosmos. For me, when I go deeply inward in psychedelics, that's always the end outcome, the end result is getting in touch with my divinity, my own sacredness, and how essentially I was dreamed into existence by this very loving cosmos that wanted me to be here and have consciousness and be in a relationship with it. Well, astrology does the same thing. They both serve a religious function in the sense that religion means to bind back. They both,
Mm.
psychedelics and astrology, bind me back both to myself, to creation and source, and ecologically to the natural world of Earth, but also ecologically to the different relationships that I'm in with the people in my life, my husband, my parents, my siblings, my friends. Both astrology and psychedelics are a tool for self reflection that I hope is, I know many of us are using that to become better people. You could say to become more conscious, to become more aware, but hopefully to become more kind and more caring.
Mm.
So, what happens in visionary states with psychedelics, often intuitively, I then can see in astrology. So, astrology for me isn't just a tool of consciousness, an amplification of consciousness like psychedelics are, but it also creates an edifice or an architecture to metaphysically hold what's happening for me in visionary states. When I go into visionary states and I understand something about the nature of existence, astrology provides a worldview or a cosmology to hold what happens in those visionary states. It's like an anchor or a grounding place for me to integrate and make meaning out of what's happening, which
Hmm.
is, I think, what we're all doing when we come out of these powerful experiences, right?
Right.
We're trying to make sense of it
Yeah.
and apply it to our life in some type of meaningful and helpful way.
Hmm. Yeah, I love that. I'm thinking about just this project, and during my Saturn return, like If I did, I guess like that was a really helpful anchor for me. Just understanding maybe what was going on in my chart during that time and having this lingo of stands work. I really viewed this time as like a BPM 2. Like the walls are closing in. I'm feeling suffocated. Like I had to just like, all this death started happening around me. I had to like leave my life in Burlington, and then I started grad school. I started this project and really just had to like let go of so much stuff, and it felt really constrictive. And I mean, that's really archetypal of Saturn, right? This kind of like constrictive energy, but also that idea of building a new foundation, letting go of things that like aren't serving you, time starting to become a little bit more concrete. And okay, maybe I had this narrative and this cosmology, and maybe that was helping me navigate through it. But at the same time, I feel like if I didn't have that, I don't know. I feel like I would have felt like I was going nuts for a little bit because how intense the energy was. And sometimes I'd wake up and be like, what the hell is going on? Like, I feel like I am just stuck in a trip, you know?
Right?
Like everything that's unfolding within all this stuff happens so quickly, like within months. And like, I literally just felt like I was stuck in a really bad trip. I was like,
Hmm.
but also knowing that I was starting to move into this transit, I was like, okay, this is like a BPM 2, walls are closing in. It feels like it's never going to end, but this is also a birthing process and something is going to come out of it. I just need to stick with it, stay centered. It's going to be painful at times, but I know that there is an endpoint here. But just like, yeah, again, like I had that narrative to attach to, which felt really grounding. Like I also wonder, like, what if I didn't have that? Like I wonder how I would have been able to navigate that period in my life.
Hmm.
I wonder what that would have looked like if I didn't have like that
Hmm.
astrological cosmology to ground to.
Hmm. That's such a beautiful illustration of how astrology can help us have the why so that we can survive the what of that's happening in our life.
Yeah.
And that's just a really great example of like if we have a sense of purpose for why something's happening, the human spirit is capable of enduring just about anything
Hmm.
as long as there's some type of hope in it being for a reason. And with what you were going through in your Saturn return, to be able to hold on to that narrative that not only this too shall pass, but that this is actually a birthing process, even though it feels like death. And I think that that's really the beauty in part of what Stan brings forward in the BPMs. If you take the BPMs to heart, what you realize is that death and birth, as he says, are two different sides of the same coin, but really their perspective.
Mm.
So, from the perspective of the baby is being annihilated and it's dying to the only thing it's ever known, the womb of the mother. So, too, in the Saturn transit, which happens for everyone between 28 and 31, we all go through it. It's a universal time period of maturation and stepping from our adolescence into our adulthood. We face crises in our life that force us to confront our mortality and our limitations. And it's a time period of taking on greater responsibility. And this is what Saturn requires of us. And yet, from that being in that place, it often feels like a death or it feels constrictive, like you're saying, like there's no exit, no way out. But from the mother's perspective, she's giving birth. So
Mm.
if you can take your consciousness and project it out into the future temporally, you can see that from the other side of anything you're going through that feels like death is actually a birth, because we know on the other side of every death, there is a rebirth that takes place. And that helps us endure. That helps us not just endure and survive, but hopefully sink deeper and surrender more fully into the dying, because we know
Right.
the greater the death, the greater the rebirth.
As our teachers always say, never give up an opportunity for death and dismemberment within the holotropic or psychedelic state.
Oh my God, that's awesome. Right?
Yeah.
This is part of it, actually, the genius of what Rick and Stan figured out was that the four BPMs correspond to the four outer planets.
Mm.
And so this is something that they've brought forward in their work together that's been deeply influential for me and many others in understanding that it's not just in entheogenic spaces where we're going through the different BPMs that this is applicable, but that actually every moment in our life can be seen in a way that we see psychedelic experiences, and that our transits connect to that. So if you're in a BPM 2 phase of life, then you're most likely going through some type of Saturn transit. Whereas if you're more in a BPM 3 state, then you're going through a transit of Pluto. So it helps you not just in psychedelic states see where you're at in the death rebirth process or continuum that the BPMs sectionally break up, but that we can do that in our everyday life, or maybe for a relationship we're in. Maybe it's not our whole life feels like BPM 2, but this relationship feels like BPM 2.
Right.
So then Saturn would maybe be an aspect to your Venus, because Venus is about your relationships. So we can start to see the BPMs playing out in different areas of our life, not just in entheogenic states.
Right. Yeah, totally. I mean, I've definitely used that framework during certain periods of my life and go, okay, this feels like this. And I think that's why having a framework can be really helpful, right? It doesn't need to be so dogmatic and say this is happening. But during those times in my life, I just felt so thankful that I had a framework to just understand what this experience might be and how can I move through it. And whenever I feel like I have that like Saturn BPM 2 thing go on, I'm like, okay, maybe it's good to just sit still and let it crush me because it's going to propel me somewhere besides trying to fight against it and really try to escape it. And so, okay, I'm just going to sit here and wait for the sign to really start to take some more action.
Well, when you're in the BPM 2 state biologically with the mother, when you're in the birth process and being born, ideally what's happening there is that when the contractions are happening, these surges of immense energy, the mother and the child work together as a unit to what essentially turns out to be a process of massaging out the baby. So for me, if we can look at it like that, the contractions in our life are our great mother, the divine's way of birthing us into a new phase of our existence. So if we can surrender to that feeling of crushing, as you're saying, letting go of that resistance or working with the resistance consciously actually helps us move into what the divine or the universe is wanting us to step into in our life karmically, that which we are here to do. That's a helpful framework for me too, to get through the toughest times in my life.
Yeah, totally. Do you, I guess, like coming back to that idea of like a diagnostic tool, do you ever kind of practice like what Ren puts out of like looking where transits are for certain psychedelic experiences, for planning when to maybe engage in certain holotropic states of consciousness, and maybe looking at the calendar and being like, oh, I have this transit coming up. Maybe this is a good time to plan for things, or maybe I shouldn't be planning for this around this time. Like, do you ever do that type of work or look at it that way?
Absolutely. I mean, I definitely do it for myself. And, I think there's a little bit more nuance that I would want to bring to it than the way that it's traditionally practiced. Similarly, like if someone were to do MDMA assisted psychotherapy, you would ideally meet with that therapist several times before you did the medicine. And in that process, they would get to know your history. They'd understand what's going on in your life right now, right? There would be a process of building intimacy and trust. And then you would do the medicine. And then afterwards, you would have sessions to integrate. I would want to do the same thing using astrology as a diagnostic tool to help people time their psychedelic experiences. I would want to meet several times at least to really get a full history understanding of what it is that they've dealt with. Has there been any mental illness? What's the trauma we're looking at? And I'd also want to make sure that the medicine and the dosage of the medicine is well suited to the intention behind the session. And I think that's something that we need to get a lot more clear on when doing this work. And therefore, when we're looking at the timing of transits, there are no universal prescriptions that I would make. Like, oh yeah, get a Uranus transit so you can have BPM 4 and be reborn, right?
Yeah.
It's like, no, like, first of all, what's the set and setting? What's the mindset you're bringing into this? Why are you doing it? Obviously, is it a safe space? But also, like, we need to better understand how you psychologically have responded in the past to Uranus transits. Have they been destabilizing and chaotic and disruptive? Or have you taken really well to change? For example, my kind of breakthrough understanding with this was with a client I was working with, and he was going to do MDMA assisted psychotherapy. And he specifically was wanting to work on the fact that his father used to lock him in the closet when he was a boy. And this corresponded to a certain alignment in his chart. He had the sun with Mars and Saturn. You were mentioning Saturn before as the second matrix. It definitely can have a quality of feeling trapped or locked in. And with Mars there, it can be the abuse. Mars can have a tendency towards aggression. And Saturn also relates to the father or authority figure. So his dad used to beat him. And so he had this in his chart, Sun, Mars, Saturn. But he, at this point, was 60 years old. He had been in psychotherapy for decades, very well resourced. His life was stable. And he very intentionally wanted to specifically work on forgiving his father for doing this to him. And I thought at the time that what I noticed was that Mars and Saturn in the sky were coming together to form an alignment on his sun. And I think traditionally, a lot of astrologers would look at that and say diagnostically, no, that's not favorable then to be doing psychedelics in this work. But I actually thought it was the perfect energy to use, because that is where the coex lied. And because he was resourced by being in therapy and his life was stable, and I was able to counsel him about that, he felt that it was divine timing, and it actually comforted him and gave him the strength and courage to go into that work with his mindset having the intention to heal that.
Right. Yeah. And I mean, that was even a question that was popping up in my head of like these little nuances of like, you know, say if you are looking at this and you see like a quote unquote difficult transit come up and you're like, ooh, this might not be a good time. But also, could it be the perfect time to work through certain issues, right? Like maybe if we weren't looking at the astrology and looking at the charts and the transits, and then you had this experience and you went through this really difficult thing and it was so transformative, and looking back at it and be like, oh, well, now I could see how that just lined up there. Yeah, I don't know.
If the way that I take it is that if you're feeling deeply called to enter into a psychedelic state, that's primary. And then I would want to make sure you're resourced to do that in a good way. If those things are in place, then let's use the astrology to help plan and understand how you could maybe optimally set that up for what it is you're wanting to work on. And then afterwards, maybe even more significantly, to process and integrate what's taken place and to make meaning of it. And then, you know, have good steps to move forward around integrating that session. That's how I would ideally like to use it as a diagnostic tool. Stronger on the integrative side, but still very helpful in the planning side. We just want to be careful about overlaying a story onto the experience for the person going into it.
Right. Yeah. I think that's a tricky balance, right? And I guess like what's your integrative approach? Like how would you use this as an integration tool, looking at the narratives that unfold in the chart and the psychedelic experience and seeing like where the connections are?
Right. So, for example, I'd have, you know, a reading or a series of readings with someone, and we'd have a really good understanding of their archetypal blueprint, psychologically, emotionally, spiritually. And then they'd have the session, and then they would come and they would talk to me about what happens in that expanded state of consciousness. And I would see the archetypal themes and the transits and say, yeah, you know, this time is about this. So with you, for example, you know, I could look at right now and say, you know, you've over the month of January of 2020, you had Jupiter conjunct your Neptune in Capricorn. There's a tendency, if you're going to go into a psychedelic state with that transit, to have an experience that tends more towards the side of being benevolent, in the sense that it tends to be a little bit softer around the edges. There tends to be an experience of faith or hope, but it's also an amazing transit to use to tap into your big visions and your big dreams, and to really let yourself feel a sense of support and elevation by the divine.
And if anybody listened to my episode with Solterra, like I was down there during January, and I actually had an astrology reading before I went down there in December, and the astrologer said like this is the perfect time to go do stuff. You have this big Jupiter transit, and that's how my sessions felt. It felt very gentle at times and very expansive, and even like the really intense experience that I had on the night of the full moon and lunar eclipse, it was about like kind of big vision stuff, but it was intense, but also very gentle at the same time, which I found to just be so fascinating. And, I didn't like dig too much into like the transits or anything before going down there. I was just told that she kind of knew what I was doing. And so obviously she wasn't like putting anything on. She was just looking at, oh, you're going to Costa Rica in January. You have this like really awesome Jupiter transit. You're going to have a really great time down there. It's supposed to be really expansive. And I think that's going to be beautiful for you. And I mean, the four experiences were really beautiful and felt gentle at times. So that's interesting. Yeah.
And then if we look at that in this sense of an unfolding story, the transits keep moving. So now Jupiter's picking up speed, and what it's doing for the rest of 2020 is it's going to be in a harmonious trine to your moon and square your natal Jupiter. So what I would do is I would say, okay, what happened at Solterra? Let's look at that as both the seeding and the fuel for what you're supposed to be doing for the rest of the year, which is to bring that expansive quality that you had at Solterra out into the world and bring that more fully into all of your projects. And that this year of 2020 is a year of you being deeply driven and working really hard to expand out everything that you're doing. It's a year to take risks. It's a year to take that expansiveness and actually share it publicly and bring it out into the wider audience of the world. But that there's going to be a lot of needing to focus on Saturn because Saturn's also there. So not only is it hard work and focus, but it's really about you doing the structural work, like the nuts and bolts of, where's this going to be and who are you going to do it with and what are the contracts? What are the legalities? What are the details? Like you got to put that level of Saturn work in. And the more you build that foundation and that strong container through the logistics and practicality of things, that Jupiter is going to go even further. So the deeper down you go, the farther out it can go. But Solterra was like the kind of like divine fuel or cosmic fuel that you needed so that you can go out and do this work for the rest of the year.
Amazing. I guess this will be a nice little check-in to see if this actually unfolds for folks to be like, you can socially test me here if we start. I mean, there are a lot of things coming into this space all of a sudden. And I mean, Joe and I are constantly trying to shift through projects. We have so many ideas and a lot of cool little opportunities brewing. And it does seem like, it could be a lot of different traveling opportunities, more workshops, and, even just around here in the Jersey area, just like doing more breath work and workshops and stuff like that. So it's been interesting to see it starting to pick up speed a little bit. And there is a part of me where I'm like, I need to get all these structural things in place so I have the energy and the core to actually keep this sustainable, because if I just run with everything, it's going to burn out pretty quickly. And I'm just going to feel very like scattered. I'm probably not going to be able to hold on to it as well.
I can't underscore the wisdom of what you just said enough. Your intuition is spot on there. And that's the word sustainable is key here. This is what Saturn is here to help you do this year, is to put the work in to make it sustainable, to have that strong core and container and foundation. What I want to say to you is the more you can do that now in the front end, your future self is going to be so grateful, because you're going to be able to go so far.
Yeah.
Without that piece, there is real potential for collapse.
Yeah. And I think like anybody that's like kind of caught up in this psychedelic community field, they're doing this work right now. Like, I mean, there's just so much stuff happening all the time. And it seems like it just keeps picking up speed. And yeah, there's a part of me where I'm like, whoa, I need to like slow down, check in, and figure out what this strong foundation is. Because I mean, I don't know, anything that's not built on a strong foundation ends up collapsing over time. So yeah, how do you get all those ducks in the row to make it sustainable and not to burn out? And I think, yeah, especially now when the fire is just you're like, whoa, every day something is coming out within the psychedelic field, or like new events are popping up, new kind of opportunities and this and that. It's like, whoa, all right.
Yeah, I mean, there's two things there, right? You're post Saturn return now, right? You're post 31. So your Saturn transits carry a different responsibility to them. You've been initiated through that piece. So there's a requirement that you have to take care at a certain level that for me is ethical and moral, because you've made it through this rite of passage and you're on the other side of it. So the sense of responsibility is growing in you. It's getting stronger of how to do this in a really grounded, mature way. But the thing that's important to remember is this Saturn transit that we're talking about is only going to last until the end of 2020. What's going to keep going for years to come is Pluto squaring your Jupiter. So that fuel and that drive and that ambition and that great power that's welling up inside of you, this is just the beginning of that. And over the next 5 years in particular, you're going to come into a lot of resources and opportunities. Pluto Jupiter transits are a time period when we step into great wealth. It's a time of great wealth and great power and abundance, and often opportunities and resources that are coming from other people who believe in you and want to invest in what you're doing by sharing their wealth with you. So this year with Saturn there, it's like doing not only the hard work of building the sustainability, but it's also the shadow work of let's look at the other side of things that aren't so bright and sunny and tend to those, so that when you really take off next year and years after that, you're building something that can last the rest of your life instead of a couple years.
Yeah. Well, folks, then if I'm doing slow and steady stuff this year, maybe now you know why. If I say no to certain projects, this is why. This is where I'm at right now.
He's listening to his astrologer.
Yeah, thank you for that. Yeah, super, super interesting. And this is why, like, I love this stuff. Like, I don't even know this. And it just, what I'm feeling right now and just saying this to you and then just kind of validating what's going on, like I didn't know any of that stuff. Just about the sustainability and that foundation of, making sure that's there before jumping into all these bigger things. So that makes me feel good of like, okay, maybe I am listening to something. There is some sort of intuition that's flowing, and maybe it is coming from the planets. And how can we listen to that a little bit more and maybe tap into that a little bit?
Oh, I love that. Yeah, as Carl Jung said, called or not called, the gods will come. Also someone who practiced astrology with all his clients. But you're so right on. Like, what do psychedelics do? Hopefully they make us that much more intuitive and sensitive and listening to the subtleties of life, but also our inner voice and compass. And so naturally, the more tuned in you are to that, which clearly you are, the more clearly you're going to be able to see the astrology, because all the astrology is doing is reflecting to you what you already know. But it's helpful to have another person do that, right? That's what's great about therapy. But with an astrologer, it's not just me saying it to you, it's the cosmos is saying it to you.
Right.
So I'm not just mirroring you, the cosmos is mirroring you. And for me, that's very comforting in an age that has become increasingly secular and separate and atomistic. So if I can get the cosmos to mirror me and some really awesome people to mirror me, then I think I'm doing pretty well.
Yeah, you're in alignment there. Did you come across, I forget who published this, New York Times or forget what website it was, but it was like psychotherapists need to understand astrology, psychedelics, tarot, and maybe there's a fourth one.
Yeah.
What's your take on that? Being a psychotherapist, and I mean, obviously, maybe there's a bias there because you're interested in this stuff. But like, and you probably attract certain clients that are drawn to that type of work. But do you see people coming in wanting to explore like these themes a little bit more? And do you think that having at least some sort of basic understanding of astrology could be helpful in psychotherapy and just helping to navigate with clients what's coming up.
Right. I mean, yes, you could say I'm biased here. I mean, if you want to call it that, I mean, my deepest calling this life is to bring astrology and psychology together as one unified field. So I use astrology with every client that I work with, implicitly and explicitly. So people obviously come to me because I'm an astrologer and they want that to be part of their therapy practice. A lot of my clients know astrology or at least are interested in it. But if I'm not using it
Mm,
in the session, I'm always using it to help me guide what's happening in our sessions. So it's
hmm.
nice to have that there as a tool, just like you enter into a consultation group. Astrology is like a consultation I do to say, oh yeah, here's my client. Oh, I see why this issue is coming up with their husband right now. That makes total sense. Okay, for the next year, this is going to be on the table. Got it. But I think that it can be helpful for psychotherapists to bring astrology in so that they're not operating so in the dark all the time. I don't think we need to suffer so much in the swamp, in the soup. I think that there's this amazing tool the universe has given us to be able to see, to light a way on the path that we're all struggling. I mean, who doesn't experience confusion and disorientation? Astrology, tarot, these are things that again help us bind us back to ourselves and our
Hmm.
experiences. But it's not enough. Astrology by itself is not enough. And that's where the world of psychology can really be a huge asset to astrology. I think that without the psychological understanding of the planets, we're missing a huge component of what's going on. And I think that what psychotherapy brings in, even to the transpersonal movement, is a more horizontal
Mm,
relational model of saying, at the end of the day, we're all human. And what defines us most as being human
right.
is being in relationship. I only have an I because of the thou. All my relations are what give birth to me. And so by tending to the horizontal level, psychotherapy helps us live better interpersonally. And that's really, really important,
Yeah.
especially in this day and age.
Yeah. Awesome. Yeah, something you just said, I was just thinking about the background in depth psychology and archetypes, just how the archetypes are constantly playing out in the psyche. And sometimes I think it's just what the psyche is made up of, all these different parts and archetypes and how they're unfolding and playing. And that
Mm.
it does seem like I I know that you enjoy Hillman's work too, but like something I keep coming back to with like psychology, it's like we've kind of lost our way from the original practice of psyche, like, psychology with being the study of the soul, and how do we bring soul back into psychology, and maybe astrology is one tool in, and bring working with the archetypes in there. And yeah, but yeah, again, I'm a little biased too because I really enjoy the depth and transpersonal oriented stuff.
Yes, I mean, for me, it's what life is made of. It's what dreams are made of. And
Yeah,
what is life but a dream,
dream.
right?
Hmm.
And one of my favorite Hillman quotes, I love him too, is I walk around inside my dreams, and yet my dreams are coming from inside of me.
Mm,
And I feel like that's exactly what it means to have existence. And the the study or the language of the soul. I mean, a psychotherapist literally means someone who tends to the soul,
mhm.
and astrology as the language of the stars for me are one and the same. One is a little bit more terrestrial, and the other is a little bit more celestial. And the
Mm,
human being is one of the medium points, or medium matrix of the place where these two realms come together. And within that, divinity is born through us as it is through the plants and the animals. But there's a intra-hosting, a symbiotic intra-hosting that's taking place that we discover more when we symbiotically intra-host with psychedelics. And when we do psychedelics, it connects us more fully to everything. That's the exact same thing that psychology and astrology do. So they're kin. And I
yeah,
think they are a family that the more we do all of them, the more they each bring us back to the other one.
I love it. That's amazing. It's a cool way to look at it. Jessica, I feel like we could keep going, and there's definitely some topics I wanted to chat about, but yeah, we're out of time. I think we went over a little bit, but that's totally fine. So hopefully, I'll have you back on, and we can chat about some of these other things that we wanted to touch on, like the evolution of Grof's framework and theories and whatnot. That'd be really interesting to chat about. But anything that you want to end with? Any last pieces of advice or anything that's like brewing that you want to talk about? And then where people can find you. I know you're teaching some online courses, so that you can pitch that as well.
Sure. I just want to say I've just really loved being here with you today.
Likewise.
It's been really special for me. I just want to say to everybody, I just think are all doing so beautifully. I'm so proud of everybody and the earnest integrity that so many of us are bringing to this work.
Yeah.
And if astrology in any way feels like it could be a helpful framework, by all means pursue it. But if not, it's okay. It doesn't matter. There's a million ways to love the divine, and that doesn't have to be your way. It's one way. And if you want to know more or you want to engage in any way, you can find me at trustpsyche.com. And as Kyle said, I have online courses there. I teach people how to do what I do. In 12 weeks, you can learn how to track your own chart and transits and start looking at your sessions that way if you so want. So love to hear from you. I'm always here. And just all blessings to all of you in this time of both the great reckoning, but also the great becoming.
Thank you so much, Jessica. This has been awesome. And until next time.
Yes, until next time.
All right, everybody. I hope you enjoyed that episode with Jessica DiRuzza. If you want to learn more about Jessica's work, again, you can check out her website. That's trustpsyche.co, trustpsyche.com, Trust Psyche. And yeah, you can check out what she's doing. She's got some videos up there, some audio, and then also she has an astrology course. So if you're interested in exploring astrology a little bit more, definitely check out her site, Trust Psyche. And yeah, I hope you enjoy that episode. I thought it was really interesting and really kind of cool to explore my chart with her and kind of compare it to some of my experiences. I hope that was informative for you all, and hopefully it just sparked a little bit of curiosity. And again, I find astrology to be a really interesting tool and framework for understanding experiences. And I hope maybe this was just a bit interesting to you, and maybe sparked your curiosity as well to check that out, to maybe integrate it into a practice or so. Again, thank you for listening. I hope everybody enjoyed this episode. If you have any questions, comments, feel free to reach out to us, psychedelicstoday@gmail.com. And be sure to subscribe, Psychedelics Today on Stitcher, Spotify, Google Podcasts, and all those wonderful places where you listen to podcasts. Until next time, everybody, I hope you have a wonderful week, and we will catch you on the next episode of Psychedelics Today.